Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm just watching the United Nations debate over the power on the power of the veto. This is part of a rule that they have at the UN with regards to holding a debate over a recent veto. If it's happened within the last 10 days, the General Assembly is supposed to hold a debate over that veto that just happened. This is sort of a concession that they made, or a compromise that they made back in 2022 with regards to the veto, when they had a debate over the veto back in 2022 over the issue of the Russia-Ukraine war. And so they had proposed that whenever one of the P5 members, one of the permanent members of the Security Council, that they're supposed to provide a justification within 10 days for why they have vetoed something. What they have done now, rather than compelling the vetoing country to justify their veto, now they just hold a debate about it. So now there's a debate at the UN over America's veto of the ceasefire proposal, the ceasefire resolution that was proposed by Algeria, and the US, as we know, vetoed it. So now they're having a debate. I'm also part of a space on X, which you can look up from the account Invoke the 6th, because this is part of the campaign to invoke Article 6 against the United States, Article 6 of the UN Charter, which allows for the United Nations to expel a member of the United Nations if they are found to have been persistently violating the principles of the UN Charter. So that's the Article 6 campaign, and they have an account on X that's holding a space right now, so you can tune into that and listen. There's a number of very good speakers who are involved with the Article 6 campaign, and I will potentially be speaking on that as well as being here, inshallah.
From January to February.
Now, keep in mind that everything that he's talking about,
therefore essential,
the UN, everyone voted for a ceasefire. The United States said, no, keep going. Keep going. Finish them off. That's what the US said.
To all civilians in need.
Everything that he's talking about now, the US was saying it's not enough. Even the UK couldn't vote against the ceasefire. Even the UK couldn't vote against it. They abstained last time. Only the US. The whole world has a consensus. The whole Security Council has a consensus. Only the United States is against the ceasefire. That's why we're pushing Article 6 to be invoked against the United States to get them expelled from the United Nations, because they are against the global consensus. They defy the global consensus. And by their veto power, this is a genocide by veto. The genocide couldn't continue except that it's empowered by the United States veto in the Security Council.
And each life lost adds to the stain on our collective conscience. With resolve and urgency.
At this point, the only way that you can clear the collective conscience of the United Nations is to expel the United States. Invoke Article 6 against the United States and expel them from the United Nations. This is the only way that you can clear your conscience.
As soon as possible.
Meaning, the US only cares about getting the hostages out of Gaza. Once they get the hostages out of Gaza, then you can decimate the population and continue the genocide to completion. That's their definition of peace. No more Palestinians. That's their definition of peace. Complete the genocide and you'll have peace. That's the American thinking. I mean, just imagine a scene of someone firing into a crowd, right, with a machine gun, firing into a crowd. Their ammunition runs out. Their clip runs out. America is the one right next to him putting another clip in. America is putting the next clip in, making sure that they're reloaded every time. America keeps reloading the gun for them, and then they talk about they're interested in peace and trying to do everything they can to achieve peace while they're reloading Israel's gun every time. If you weren't reloading the gun, we wouldn't even have to have a request for a ceasefire, because it would already be over. If you weren't reloading the gun, it would already be over. And the US has vetoed a ceasefire 4 times in 5 months. If you mistreat and abuse people, and you don't expect them to resist, you expect them to just suffer, just endure, and just die of your bombing and your imposed starvation, and you expect them to not resist, you have dehumanized them more than it's possible to dehumanize anyone, because you don't think that they will react the same way that you would to those same circumstances. If someone was doing that to you, wouldn't you resist? If someone was doing all of those things to you, wouldn't you resist? But you somehow don't apply or don't expect the same normal human response from Palestinians. You don't think that Palestinians, apparently, you don't think Palestinians are humans, that you can treat them this way and abuse and commit war crimes against them to this extent, and you're not supposed to get a response. And this goes further. You can extend that further to the entirety of the Muslim world, and you can extend it even further when you look at the United States veto at the United Nations. What that means is, in fact, that the United States is dehumanizing the entire world. They don't see anyone in the world outside of their borders, outside of their territorial borders. They don't see anyone as a human being. Because you actually think that the whole world isn't supposed to respond to this kind of violence the way that you would respond. The way that any normal human being would respond. You don't think that the rest of the world is supposed to respond like that. Because why? Because they're not human? You think that they're not humans? You're the only one who's supposed to respond to violence with violence? You're the only one. What would Americans do? Well, we know what they do. Shock and awe. Disproportionate violence. This is what they do. So either you're not human or we're not human in your eyes. Either you're not human or we're not human. Because otherwise, you would expect all other human beings to respond the same way to violence and brutality. But apparently no one is allowed to respond the same way that you would, the same way that any normal human being would. And in this case, like I said, the whole world, the global consensus is for a ceasefire. And the United States is vetoing it. Means the United States is saying that the rest of the world, the entire population of the planet, basically are subhumans. Because you wouldn't respond that way. You didn't respond that way, did you? When Russia invaded Ukraine, you didn't think that Russia had the right to do that against your ally. But somehow you think that Israel has a right to do it against the Palestinians, and you think that the rest of the world doesn't have a right to be opposed to it. Means that you don't think that the rest of us are even human. You don't think that we're allowed, or that it's normal or natural or acceptable for the rest of the world to react the same way that you would react. Means you think you're the only humans.
Refuse to admit that those killing us are perpetrators of crimes, even when those crimes are occurring in broad daylight for all to see, for all of you to see, and you have been seeing. It is thus appropriate.
And you notice that the only thing he mentioned was the hostages? Okay, hostages, it's bad, whatever. That's fine. But 30,000 people murdered? 85% of the population displaced? You don't even mention that? You're not interested in stopping that? And you can't figure out how we can possibly stop that? Well, maybe stop reloading Israel's gun. Let's start there.
Concluding by saying, and I quote, "Our humanity compels us to act." End of quote.
Yes. Our humanity compels us to act, but they don't believe that you have humanity. So you're compelled not to act. You're compelled not to act. Because for them, only humans are compelled to act. Because they're the only ones who think that they're the only ones who have a claim on humanity, on the title of humanity. The rest of us are some kind of subspecies.
It is the certainty of the perpetrators that they will never be held accountable.
Because of the United States backing the United Nations Security Council, which again is why Article 6 needs to be invoked against the United States and have them expelled from the United Nations. I mean, how much more do you need to know, actually? You don't need to know anything more than the fact that weapons manufacturers are starting to refuse to sell to Israel. That means they know the trajectory of the ICJ case. They know that Israel is committing genocide, that the evidence that Israel is committing genocide is irrefutable, And they know that even the subsequent actions of Israel while they're on trial for genocide just do nothing but further substantiate the allegations of genocide against them. So arms companies know, weapons companies know that they can be implicated and they can be indicted for genocide if they continue to supply Israel with weapons. And many of them are stopping. Many of them are now backing away from arming Israel because they know they can see perfectly well what's happening. And they're not in a position like politicians. They're not in a position to deny it or to put their head in the ground and ignore it and pretend like it's not happening, because they could be held liable in court. Civil damages, not to mention criminal cases, but they're more concerned about civil cases being made against them for arming war criminals. They could face billions of dollars in lawsuits. So they are backing away from arming Israel. Even politically, Joe Biden could very well lose in the United States just because of his support for the genocide, just because of this. There's many other reasons he should, but just because of this, he could lose. So support for Israel is completely destroying the power structure in the United States and in the West generally, and they're losing credibility all over the world. But as I said, just the fact that arms manufacturers are starting to refuse to sell to Israel, not because they're moral, but because they can see what Israel is guilty of, and they can see that the case in the ICJ is all but won. It's already, it's a closed case, Yani. The judgment is clear. There's no way that it can go any other way than that Israel is committing a genocide, because they're continuing to commit it even while they're on trial for genocide. So weapons manufacturers don't want anything to do with it. They're steadily backing away because they know that they could be held accountable for what Israel is doing, which is a confirmation of what Israel is doing, is what I'm saying. If weapons manufacturers can see what's happening and they don't want to be included in what's happening, then that's all you need to know about what's happening. Because the truth is, and I've said this many times, this is an American genocide in Gaza. Everyone says it's Israel, everyone says it's a Zionist genocide. Yes, it's that too. But it's an American genocide, just being carried out by the Zionist brigade of the United States, because they wouldn't be able to do any of this if it wasn't for American backing, both funding, arming, and the cover fire that's provided for them by the Americans on with their seat on the Security Council, and the veto power that's like a force field around Israel that immunizes them from any accountability at the United Nations.
One day in the past, few brave workers in a grocery store in Ireland started the boycott movement, the abhorrent system of apartheid. There are brave workers today.
Anyone we've got from Ireland? If there's anyone here watching from Ireland,
weapons to Israel and ammunition,
we're proud of you.
to unleash a movement.
We need to get an Article 6 campaign going in Ireland. We've got one in the UK. We've got one in South Africa, we've got one in the States, we've got one in Germany, in other European countries, an Article 6 campaign. We need one in Ireland. We need some representatives in Ireland. So step up, huh? Send me a DM.
The settlers should be sanctioned. Don't allow a single of one of them to get a visa to visit any of your countries.
I mean, I'm sorry. That's okay. That's.
Show them that
I'm sorry.
Business.
This is something that the U.S. has done. I think the U.K. has done, putting visa restrictions on settlers. Settlers come from you. They don't need a visa to go to the United States. They're Americans. They don't need a visa to go to the UK. They're British. They don't need visas to go to European countries. They're European. They don't need visas. There's no such thing as an Israeli settler. They're all from somewhere else. What are you talking about? They don't need visas. They just got off the plane in Israel from New York, from Miami. You think they need a visa to go back to Miami? They have American passports. What are you talking about? They have British passports. They have French passports. They have European passports, EU passports. They don't need visas. That's a gesture. That's a symbolic gesture to make it look like you're doing something when you're doing nothing. I mean, how many settlers were born in Tel Aviv? Come on. Those settlers were born in Brooklyn. Those settlers were born in Miami.
Freedom.
Those settlers were born in Golders Green in London.
We call on the Council to act in accordance with its primary responsibility for the maintenance of peace and security.
Their primary responsibility is to do whatever the U.S. tells them until they can kick the U.S. out. BRICS, the BRICS countries, are working to isolate the United States, and they're working to actually show the ineffectiveness of institutions like the United Nations and the ineffectiveness of institutions like the ICJ. Western dominated, Western controlled, Western originated, Western created so-called international institutions that are international only insofar as they impose Western rules on the globe, on the whole planet. And insofar as it gives Western countries, specifically and particularly the United States, it gives them the power to organize all of the countries of the world according to their dictates and in accordance with their policy objectives and their interests. That's what these international institutions are. They're essentially in origin, in nature, in character, and in practice, colonizing institutions of Western colonialism. That's what they are. And BRICS nations, the BRICS nations, are using those institutions to expose them for what they are and using them to isolate the United States. Because as I've said many times, the wind is blowing eastward now. The wind is blowing to the south. And the West is becoming less and less important to the global economy. The global economy is moving. The center of the global economy is moving. The center of gravity of the global economy is moving to the south and to the east. And the BRICS nations and the OCGFC, the owners and controllers of global financialized capital, know that perfectly well because they have been part of instigating that. 30 years ago, they started talking about BRICS. The BRICS nations are isolating the United States, and even European countries are starting to feel it now. Even European countries are starting to see which way the wind is blowing and whose side they need to be on. And it's not America's. So this is why I've said, with the Article 6 campaign, now people will have a sort of a colonized mindset where they think that it's impossible to kick the United States out of the UN. But of course it's not impossible. It's not impossible at all. You've got Russia and China on the Security Council, and then you have America, the UK, and France. Well, the UK couldn't even stomach vetoing the ceasefire. They had to abstain. It's entirely possible that you could get the UK to abstain on a vote to expel the United States from the UN. It's entirely conceivable that you could get them to abstain. France voted for the ceasefire. France and the UK have increasing connections with the Gulf and with North Africa, although France has lost some power in the Sahel. But in terms of their energy, they're very reliant on the Gulf and on now with their green energy and renewable energy initiatives. They're relying increasingly on solar power from North Africa. So it's entirely conceivable that both the UK and France could be convinced either to vote in favor of invocation of Article 6 against the United States or to abstain, which would then send it to the General Assembly. And if you have a 2/3 majority at the General Assembly to expel the United States, well, then that's what will happen. And what do you think of the chances that 2/3 of the planet are tired and fed up of being treated like nothing and no one, and being treated as subhumans who have no say? What do you think of what do you think is the likelihood that 2/3 of the General Assembly, 2/3 of the countries on Earth, are fed up of having no say? They're fed up of being overruled by the United States. They're fed up of the United Nations being used as nothing but a policy tool for the United States. What do you think of the chances that they might vote in favor of expelling the United States? I think getting a 2/3 majority is maybe a modest goal. I think you might see for the first time ever a completely unanimous General Assembly vote in favor of that.